microbial phenomenon. That is what microbes can do in the world. So this first slide is just an overview of some of the microbial phenomenon we'll be discussing in this PowerPoint. One is the One Health Initiative, where we take kind of an ecological view on especially infectious diseases. We'll be looking at environmental health. We'll be looking at microbes and their ability to make biofuels for us. We'll see how microbes can reduce plastic wastes. We'll look at the human microbiome and health and disease. We'll be looking at our diet and probiotics and how they can impact our health in both a positive and negative way. We'll discuss the ecology of infectious diseases, and then EIDs, which stands for Emerging Infectious Diseases. Always a continuing repeating theme in microbiology is biological evolution, natural selection, and we'll use a specific example of the spread of antibiotic resistance and drug resistance in microbial pathogens. We'll talk briefly about harmful algal blooms and how another group of microbes can help reduce the impact of harmful algal blooms. We'll be talking about microbial bioremediation, in which microbes can help us eliminate or detoxify environmental pollutants. We'll be talking about bioreactors, and I think we have a repeat here talking about microbial biofuels, and also, very briefly, the impact of microbes on global climate change. So first of all, we'll talk about the One Health Initiative. This is an ecological approach, letting us understand the interconnections between human health and animal health and environmental health. We take a One Health approach in our Biology 440, our general microbiology class. We won't talk just about microbial pathogens that cause disease. We'll be talking about environmental health, the health of non-human animals, and how in developing healthy humans, we have to have a healthy environment and healthy animals. And we'll be looking at how microbes play a role in people, animal, and environmental health. A big issue is our overdependence on petroleum products for fuels. A lot of interest in how microbes can provide alternative fuels, for example, by their ability to break down plant cellulose, releasing glucose, which can then, through microbial fermentation, be converted into ethanol, which can be used as a biofuel. This might be a topic. We'll be mentioning that there might be one opportunity to make an extra credit poster this semester, so looking into microbes and their role in producing biofuels would be an excellent poster topic. Huge issues with environmental pollution, and one we know a lot about is non-degradable plastics, the accumulation of plastic wastes in our landfills and in our oceans. So something really exciting is that microbes can make degradable bioplastics. So again, this might be another good topic for an extra credit poster. And the beauty of these microbial bioplastics is they will degrade and they won't pollute. This is a fun topic from MicroPia, the microbe museum out of Amsterdam. So a lot of research into seeing how fungi, filamentous fungi, might help replace plastics, styrofoams in the future. And they've had all sorts of success making all kinds of things out of fungi. Living in a moldy world where fungi replace plastics. This is a fun YouTube if you have a chance to watch. And again, fungi being used to replace non-degradable styrofoam as packing materials and insulating materials. We'll talk a lot about the human microbiome and health and disease. This is a lot of text, but of interest is the program here. This was sponsored again by MicroPia. Just looking at all the different topics here related to the human microbiome. We'll be exploring how a healthy microbiome can support good health in humans, and we'll also be exploring how an out of balance, an abnormal microbiome can contribute to all types of diseases that before we never thought had any microbial connection at all. The human microbiome, you've been hearing a lot about this, and we'll be talking quite a bit about it in our course. So what is the human microbiome? So one definition, it's all the microbes and the microbial genes found on and in a human. Older terms were microbiota, microflora. The initial studies have focused on bacteria, but our microbiome also includes viruses, archaea, fungi, and protozoa. So we always want to ask, well, who cares? Who cares about the microbiome, human microbiome? Why do we care? So many studies are pointing to altered gut microbiomes as factors contributing to chronic diseases such as diabetes, obesity, and cardiovascular disease. So it would be so powerful if we could come up with therapies that could help these altered gut microbiomes, influence them to become healthier, better balanced gut microbiomes, and perhaps one day that could be used to treat diabetes, obesity, and cardiovascular disease, and certainly to prevent these chronic diseases. Lots of interest in our diet and probiotics. So probiotics are microbes we intentionally eat, ingest, drink, with the hope that they'll contribute to a healthier gut microbiome and therefore support good health. Also of great interest is that what we eat, the diet that we eat, will influence the makeup of the intestinal microbiome. So some diets will support a good, balanced, healthy intestinal microbiome, and then other diets, and thinking of diets maybe high in sugar or processed carbohydrates, tend to support an unhealthy, altered gut microbiome. So we want to learn how to feed our intestinal microbiome to help the good guys grow. And again, just fascinating topics. Can the gut microbiome be altered to prevent or treat human disease? And a hot topic here is this topic of the power of poop, or as Dr. Jenna Meyer would say, transputation or fecal transplants. We'll be talking a lot about chronic infections with the intestinal microbial pathogen Clostridium difficile. Many of you know it as C. diff. C. diff can cause profuse diarrhea. In some cases can cause perforation, a hole to form in the intestine, and that can lead to life-threatening peritonitis. Some folks get colonized with C. diff, and the traditional therapy was to give them more antibiotics, which was ironic because often it's the treatment of a person with antibiotics that kills many members of the good microbiome in the intestine and then permits the pathogenic C. diff to grow and overgrow, causing clinical illness. So there have been several trials where people suffering with chronic C. diff infections received a fecal transplant, perhaps from a family member. And the idea is that the fecal transplant has all the good members of a healthy intestinal microbiome. And so that feces with those good microbes then are transplanted into the intestine of our C. diff patient. And many studies have shown that by these fecal transplantations, a good normal microbiome can be reestablished, and thus the chronic C. diff infections are treated successfully. So this is a really ecological, holistic way to approach some of these microbial infections. Clostridium difficile we'll be learning later. It's a bacterium, and it's unusual in that it can form a really tough, resistant resting structure called the endospore. And we're going to discover these endospores are resistant to alcohol hand sanitizers. They can survive boiling. They're resistant to many antibiotics and to many disinfectants and antiseptics. And the endospore is one reason why C. diff infections can rapidly spread, say, in a hospital setting. We'll be learning more about these endospores later. And again, you can see from MicroPia, there's a big interest in the science of gut feelings, the gut microbiome. Some studies suggest that there is a connection between our gut and our brain, and that the microbes growing in our intestines can actually influence our mood, may contribute to perhaps sadness or depression, or on the opposite end, may support our feelings of being healthy and happy and well balanced. So maybe some of our so-called mood disorders, maybe one link is, again, an abnormal gut microbiome. Really fascinating. Years ago, nobody would have thought that there would have been a connection between microbiology and neuroscience, or microbiology and psychology. So it's really exciting that we're learning how all these fields, they're weaving together a more holistic picture of human health. Then we're going to next switch to the ecology of infectious disease. Infectious diseases are those caused by microorganisms. In the old days, we would just study the microbial pathogen. Pathogen means something that causes suffering. But we now know that in infectious diseases, it's really an ecological issue, and there's three major factors: the microbes, the hosts, and the environment. We could say that infectious disease is like the perfect storm. We have the host factors, the pathogen factors, and environmental factors are just right that permit this perfect storm, the infectious disease. So we want to study not only the pathogen, we want to study the host and understand host defenses and what lowers those host defenses. We want to study the environment to understand what environmental factors have to be present for pathogens to be transferred from their source, the reservoir, to a new host. So truly we want to develop our general microbiology class is really an ecology class. We want to keep these three factors always in mind: the pathogen, the host, and the environment. An example is some of the newly emerging infectious diseases, EIDs, and some of these include Ebola. Bubonic plague is not new, it's an old one, but Zika virus is an emerging infectious disease. White nose syndrome of bats, certainly here in North America, it's a new infectious disease of bats. So a little bit of vocabulary here. So the cause of all these diseases are microbial pathogens. So we want to remember microbes are agents or organisms too small to be seen without a microscope or a magnifying glass. When we refer to pathogens, pathogen comes from the prefix pathos, which means suffering, and the suffix genic means to make. So pathogens are organisms that cause disease, disease in other organisms. We'll be focusing a lot on classification. If we've had a chance already to go over the PowerPoint Unit 1.2, we've talked a lot about classification of the pathogens causing the disease. It's important that we know classification so we can choose the correct drugs. We have some idea of the course of the infection. And very importantly, we have to know how the host became infected. This is the study of transmission. So here in this slide, we see an electron micrograph of the Ebola virus. Here's a little baby suffering from Zika infection. When the baby was in utero while the mom was pregnant, the mom became infected with the Zika virus, and the Zika virus crosses the placenta and then loves to grow in the neurons of babies, and this leads to severe neurological problems. Here we have, it's a little bit hard to see, but this is a photomicrograph of gram-stain bacteria that cause bubonic plague, Yersinia pestis. And here we have another photograph of a flea. Fleas are what we call the arthropod vectors that transfer Yersinia pestis from an infected host to a new host. And here we have a little ground mammal that can act often as a reservoir of Yersinia pestis. In these final pictures here, this is a poor little bat that's been infected with a fungal pathogen that causes white nose syndrome. This is a devastating disease of bats, and it's just been discovered here in California. And you might say, well, who cares? Well, bats are important consumers. They eat insects that can transmit pathogens between animals and from people to people. For example, bats eat lots of mosquitoes. And why do we care? Well, we know that the Zika virus One way Zika virus is transferred between people is through the bite of mosquitoes. So if the bats die, there'll be a boom in mosquito populations, and we would predict that we'd see an increase in transmission of mosquito-borne diseases such as Zika virus, West Nile virus, the protozoal pathogen Plasmodium that causes malaria. We'll see increase in dengue virus infections, yellow fever virus infections, the list goes on and on. So again, EIDs are emerging infectious diseases. These are new diseases within the past few decades. So examples would be the prion disease, mad cow disease, the newly evolved strain of bird influenza, avian influenza H5N1, and the Ebola virus. It's predicted that most emerging infectious diseases of humans in the future will be zoonoses, and zoonoses are infectious diseases of animals which can be transmitted to humans. So it's now known that bubonic plague is a zoonosis. Ebola virus infection can be zoonotic. Avian influenza, zoonotic, transmission of influenza virus from birds, poultry to humans. And this was a little cartoon that Dr. Gina Holland shared with me, and this is the old wise bubonic plague, telling the new little kid on the block, Ebola, you have much to learn, grasshopper. Again, we want to stress that ecology is an important part of infectious disease transmission. So in Ebola virus transmission, bats can play a role, and then other animals get infected, and these animals might be used as a source of food by humans, and then the humans get infected, and then there's human-to-human transmission. I'm going to stop right here, and we'll do a second audio recording for the last few slides in this PowerPoint Unit 1.3.